Imagine this, thousands of years ago, on the banks of the Nile, a civilization was busy creating art not just for decoration, but for eternity. We often think that art began with cave paintings or tribal masks, but the real continuous story of art, the one that connects to us today, starts in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians built a visual language that influenced the Greeks, the Romans, and eventually, all of Western art. In a way, every painting in a modern museum still carries a bit of Egypt in it. And what's the first image that comes to mind when we say Egypt? The pyramids. Those massive, timeless structures rising out of the desert. They weren't just built to impress, they were built to serve a purpose. Each one was a tomb, designed to help a god-king, a pharaoh, reach the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that their ruler was divine, sent from the gods to rule on earth. When a pharaoh died, he didn't just disappear, he was expected to rise again and join the gods. But for that to happen, his body had to stay safe. That's why they went to incredible lengths to preserve it through mummification and by hiding it deep inside a mountain of stone, the pyramid. Inside those pyramids, in chambers sealed off from the world, stood stone coffins and walls covered in magical spells meant to guide the king's soul to the next life. But the Egyptians didn't stop there. They thought, what if the body gets damaged? No problem, let's make a backup. So, they made statues. Hard, heavy, and built to last forever. These weren't for public display, they were hidden inside the tomb, there just for the soul to recognize itself. The sculptor's job wasn't to make the pharaoh look pretty, it was to make him live forever. That's literally what Egyptian artists called themselves, the ones who make alive. At first, only kings got this treatment. But over time, nobles, and even regular citizens who could afford it, started ordering their own tombs, complete with statues and wall paintings. Everyone wanted a shot at eternal life. If you look at those early portraits from the Old Kingdom, around 2700 BCE, they feel strangely powerful. The faces are calm, solid, timeless. The artists weren't interested in showing fleeting emotions, they were after something essential, something permanent. That's why Egyptian art looks so balanced and still. Now, if we move to the painted walls of Egyptian tombs, things get even more interesting. These scenes weren't meant to be art in our modern sense. Nobody was supposed to see them, except the dead person's soul. The images were like magical stand-ins for real people and real actions. Instead of burying servants with the dead, which used to happen in very ancient times, Egyptians started painting servants and workers on the walls. The idea was that their images could serve the dead in the afterlife. When we look at these murals today, we see bright, lively depictions of Egyptian life, fishing, farming, dancing. But the style might seem strange to us. The reason? Egyptian artists didn't draw what they saw, they drew what they knew. They believed every part of a person or object had to be clearly visible and recognizable. So they painted heads and legs in profile, but shoulders and eyes from the front, because that way, nothing important was hidden. Think of it like a map more than a photo, it's not about one moment, it's about showing everything that matters. That's why Egyptian art looks so flat yet so complete. It wasn't about capturing a fleeting image, it was about preserving the truth forever. In short, Egyptian art wasn't made for us, it was made for eternity. But in a way, it succeeded. 5,000 years later, those faces carved in stone are still looking back at us, unchanged. And maybe that was the point all along. Let's take a closer look at how Egyptian artists actually saw the human body, because their way of drawing people is one of the most unique in all of art history. If you've ever seen Egyptian paintings, you've probably noticed something odd. People look flat, twisted, and kind of impossible. The heads are in profile, the eyes look straight at you, the shoulders face forward, but the legs point to the side. It's like their bodies are made of puzzle pieces turned in different directions, and that's exactly what's happening. The Egyptians weren't trying to show what they saw with their eyes. They were showing what they knew about the human body. To them, every part had to be drawn from its most recognizable angle. The head looked clearest from the side, but the eye looked best from the front, so they combined the two. The chest was turned forward to show both shoulders, but the legs and arms were shown from the side so you could see movement clearly. There's even a fun detail: both feet are usually drawn from the inside view, because that shape was easier to draw. That's why Egyptian figures often look like they have two left feet. But this wasn't about bad drawing or lack of realism. It was a rule, almost a sacred one. Artists followed a strict system that let them show everything that mattered. After all, how could someone in the afterlife hold offerings to the gods if their arms were hidden or cut off by perspective? Egyptian art was less about how things looked and more about what they meant. The size of a person in a painting, for example, wasn't about distance or perspective, it was about importance. The bigger you were, the more powerful you were. Pharaohs towered over servants, and gods were often the largest of all. Once you understand these rules, Egyptian art suddenly makes sense. What looks flat or weird at first actually becomes a detailed record of life thousands of years ago. Take, for example, the wall paintings from the tomb of a nobleman named Akhenaten. He lived about 1900 BCE and had one of the most impressive tombs of his time. The walls of his tomb show him hunting birds with a boomerang, fishing with his family, and being served by attendants. His titles, carved in hieroglyphs, list every honor he ever received: administrator, priest, master of ceremonies, even friend of the king. Below the hunting scenes, we see fishermen hauling in nets, and above the doorway, Akhenaten again, this time trapping birds with a net in the reeds. The artist even shows how the trap works, from above. You can see the birds, the net, and even the rope he pulls to close it. It's basically a 4,000-year-old instructional diagram. What's amazing is how detailed and precise everything is. Every fish, every bird, every plant is drawn so carefully that modern biologists can still identify the species. Egyptian artists started each wall with a grid, a geometric framework, to keep proportions perfect. Their sense of order was so strict that even a tiny mistake could throw off the whole scene. And yet, within that order, there's life and beauty. The lines are clean, the animals full of movement. That balance between geometry and observation is what gives Egyptian art its timeless harmony. Over time, these rules became the foundation of what we now call the Egyptian style. Every statue, painting, and temple followed the same visual laws. Male skin was painted darker than female skin. Gods had fixed symbols: Horus with a falcon's head, Anubis with a jackal's. Artists trained for years, learning to carve hieroglyphs and perfect these sacred proportions. But here's the key difference from modern art: originality wasn't the goal. The best Egyptian artist wasn't the one who created something new, it was the one who reproduced the traditional forms most perfectly. That's why, for over 3,000 years, Egyptian art changed so little. What was beautiful in the age of the pyramids was still beautiful 1,000 years later. Egyptian art wasn't about innovation. It was about perfection, an unbroken line of tradition that aimed, like their monuments, to last forever. Now, imagine this: for over 1,000 years, Egyptian art followed the same strict rules. Every figure, every god, every scene obeyed the same visual laws. And then, suddenly, one man came along and broke them all. His name was Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten. He ruled during the 18th dynasty, in the period called the New Kingdom. And unlike any pharaoh before him, he dared to challenge both religion and art. Akhenaten was a radical. He rejected Egypt's countless gods and decided to worship just one, the sun itself, Aten. To show his devotion, he even changed his name, from Amenhotep, meaning Ammonius is satisfied, to Akhenaten, devoted to Aten, and built an entirely new capital city far from the old religious centers, Amarna. And with this new faith came a new vision of art. Gone was the stiff, timeless style of the old pharaohs. Instead, Akhenaten's artists started painting life as it was: personal, emotional, even intimate. We see the pharaoh not as a distant god-king, but as a man, walking in the garden with his wife, Nefertiti, playing with his daughters, leaning on a cane. Sometimes, he's even shown with an oddly elongated face and body, thin neck, wide hips, full lips. Was it realism? Was it symbolism? Maybe both. Some historians think he wanted to be portrayed in all his human imperfection, or maybe his unusual look symbolized a spiritual transformation. Whatever the reason, these images must have shocked his contemporaries. Imagine seeing the divine ruler, who for centuries had been carved like an immortal god, now shown kissing his children under the sun. It was revolutionary. This new style reached its peak under Akhenaten's son, Tutankhamun, whose tomb was discovered in 1922, nearly untouched. Many objects inside, like the famous throne backrest, still reflect that Amarna style, the royal couple bathed in sunlight, the rays of Aten reaching down like hands to bless them. The scene feels alive, warm, even tender, something unthinkable in earlier Egyptian art. But it didn't last. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt's priests and artists quickly restored the old gods and the old style. The window that had opened briefly to a more human, expressive art closed again, and Egypt returned to its timeless order. Still, that short burst of freedom left a mark. For a moment, Egyptian art wasn't about eternity, it was about life. Meanwhile, far from the Nile, on the island of Crete, artists were already exploring that freedom naturally. The Minoans, the people of ancient Crete, painted scenes full of movement and grace, acrobats leaping over bulls, dolphins swimming across palace walls, dancers caught mid-step. When archaeologists uncovered the Palace of Knossos in the early 1900s, no one could believe such lively art was from 3,500 years ago. Even in nearby Mycenae, on the Greek mainland, we see the same fluidity, like on a bronze dagger decorated with hunters chasing lions, the figures bending and twisting with dynamic energy. Egyptian artists would have been amazed by that kind of freedom, and maybe a little jealous. But in Egypt, tradition ruled. Even after Tutankhamun, the old artistic laws continued almost unchanged for another 1,000 years. New kings came, new temples rose, but the art stayed the same. Eternal, predictable, perfect. Just the way the Egyptians wanted it. Because to them, change wasn't progress. Change was chaos. And their art, like their civilization, was meant to last forever.